Hi, everyone. I'm kind of new to wearing glasses, so it's always on and off, but I'm so happy to see you today. Um, this morning, I was thinking about being here at MIT, and in some of my engagement with everyone, I think I'm in the right place because my purpose really is to support students, to make sure that students are happy, especially STEM students, and that their programs are helping them. So that's really like why I'm here today, because I love students. I was a teacher for a long time. And yeah, so today my talk is about Black women cops and AI. Um, I will cover these topics: the AI Bill of Rights, theoretical framework, tensions in technology, some terms, EDIB and AI, verbal and visual representations, the importance of creating an ethical AI rubric, which is why what I'm really passionate about from a social science perspective and with a hard science. How can we connect on creating something? Looking at a case study as well. Um, so a little bit of context for you. So I have a social science and a humanitarian background, which attracts me to STEM broadly, since culture influences technology and vice versa. I was living in Japan when the social justice movement was unfolding, and it felt really far away from me, although in Japan people were still being active. I wanted to get involved in DEI, although it was kind of new to me because I lived in Japan for about 2 decades. So Japan's a different ballgame. So in America, I heard about this idea, this phenomenon, and I thought, how can I be involved? I thought it would be disingenuous to get involved without really learning more about myself than to just say I want to take up this mantle. So coursework at Harvard Divinity School, Harvard School of Engineering, and being at the Berkman Klein Center really shaped my perspective and informed my point of view. And this point of view and this presentation I made on my own last year before the Supreme Court ruling last summer and before what happened last fall and what is happening now. So, as an educator, I can't help having an interdisciplinary lens, and that's why I'm here today. Um, I was really fascinated last year when I learned that the White House had a talk with these leaders in creating AI tools. Like yourself, I was very excited that this was happening. And I recently started to think that because I studied international and comparative education, this idea of isomorphism and loose coupling or decoupling happens when organizations like the United Nations have some edict they want to implement, and it doesn't really translate when it hits the ground. And I believe that this can happen, a kind of isomorphism with companies who create tools and set precedents that doesn't really translate when it hits the ground to places that may not be Harvard or MIT. And that is a huge concern to me. So I came across a professor at NYU, McIlwain, I believe, and he has a theoretical framework that really helps me to put technology and AI into perspective. And the dimensions begin with the problem and really looking at a timeline of when these tensions began with IBM that was proselytizing basically how their tools can help governments to problem solve. And how do we really define a problem? I think as scientists, you really understand what that means. But what are social problems as composed to academic problems? Then how do we look at a problem from an institutional lens? And how do we explore that problem? And problems that may emerge in some communities as opposed to other communities. Um, Again, these are my own ideas, and I love MIT, but I think sometimes when tools are created, they can be misappropriated. And if my memory is correct, a lot of this original research began at MIT in the 50s and 60s with mathematicians who created these statistical models. Um, After that, there's an application of tools, how the tools is scaled and how it's applied and how it becomes ubiquitous. I think we are all aware of how tools can implement communities and even whole countries. And so I think when tools are misapplied, they can have really severe consequences. tensions and technology. So as technology advances, I think there's a problem that sometimes that some systemic oppression can also be perpetuated. For example, from the colonial times to the present, I believe that Black women have experienced the following: problems with white men and the US government, problems with white women and the US government, and problems with Black men as well. So considering things that have happened like in the media, I feel that for some reason Black women have really been adversely impacted by these tools. I am not a Black woman, but I think that I care about Black women very deeply. And these tensions kind of emerged, as we all know of these cases with police violence that really negatively impacted Black women. And if we want to include all people, we can say trans women as well. Um, Further tensions in technology in schools, we can think of the domain where problems occur and how these problems manifest in terms of like how Black girls are perceived in comparison to boys and their white peers, how they are often sexualized. Online, we are all familiar with the case of doing searches for Black women, what images appear, and there in other social aspects in terms of pay equity, desirability. And so I think that we, I'm very concerned about this, and I'm thinking, what can I do to not solve the problem, but address the problem, to question the problem? So some of the terms that I'm really interested in are ethics of course, engineered inequality, algorithmic accountability, default discrimination, and how do these come into play? I don't want to blame engineers for anything, but I think that a person who says that they're apolitical or if they're not concerned, I think, how do we still hold them accountability for what they create? Prior to what has been happening, I strongly felt that this notion of EDIB would become dismantled. The reason for this, again, is my personal opinion. I think that EDIB will be replaced by ethical AI. I made this presentation like a year ago in January, and then so many things began to unfold. And I'm sure that if you're following the news, you can read for yourselves and hear for yourselves, or maybe discuss amongst your close friends and colleagues what is happening and how you may feel about that. And I still feel very strongly that ethical AI or protocols for ethical AI will become more prevalent because it impacts all of us, regardless of who we are and how we may identify our lived experiences and our own intersectional identities. So all of that, when I was at Columbia, I had learned how to make a literature review, which is really annoying, and like putting all these things in place. So I'm just putting everything in place to get to my point. When I looked at AI, I was thinking about verbal and visual cues as it pertains to data sets, language models, data. I always wanted to, when people talk about data, I'm like, whose worldview is this representing? And again, the question of epistemology or ontology, like, what does it really mean? And so I'm really questioning and really exploring. And I think being in this space is an opportunity for me to learn so that I can serve others. And one thing to my point about AI visualization, this image is from the New York Times. A Black woman artist really was exploring how images of Black women are depicted in visualizations, which are just really unattractive or exaggerated or caricatures of what they believe a Black woman is or Black beauty is. And I think if the language around Black women populates things that are unattractive, and if the images are also unattractive, what does it really say when we create tools that then kind of scrutinize Black women? So I saw this declaration by the White House. And when I read this, it seemed to me like a DEI statement. I was like, whoa, you should not face discrimination by algorithms, and systems should be used and designed in an equitable way. Algorithmic discrimination occurs when automated systems contribute to unjustified different treatment or impacts disfavoring people based on their race, color, ethnicity, sex, etc. So I read this and I was like, wow, interesting. Taking this statement, I just try to break it down. Like, what are they really talking about? What are the variables here? And just trying to, again, play around by myself, thinking of how can I understand what they're saying? How can I measure this? How can I use my social science background to really write a research question to explore this? And just started looking at some of these things like the variables of race, color, ethnicity, pregnancy, gender, identity, and just kind of really exploring what those terms mean. So I came across this article about an 8 months pregnant woman who was arrested after a false facial recognition match, and I couldn't believe it. And all these events came together for me to really make this proposal, this presentation, to really begin to explore what is really happening and why this is happening. So simply, a woman called Portia, she was 8 months pregnant when she was arrested by the police for carjacking, with 2 young children present. The facial recognition technology misidentified her, and this was in February of 2023. So thinking of what happened to this woman, I came across a researcher, Agrawal. I believe he's at Harvard Business School, and in one of his papers, he said that judgment, emotional intelligence, and creativity are really critical to how we use tools that are created. And taking these 3 pillars, I started to look at the fact of what happened in this case. For example, the woman was pregnant, like she has a big belly. How is she really going to carjack a vehicle? Emotional intelligence. Police surrendered all sense of logic and ethics to a machine. They trust the machine more than their own moral sense of duty. Creativity. Fact, police are over-reliant on tools and are seemingly void of when to discard use of machines for basic human interaction. So again, just really exploring the facts, not the feelings around the situation. I really believe that what happened to Portia was really unfair and really careless. And this is one case, but I think as our future, our world becomes more digitized, and as AI becomes more prevalent, we have to really think more carefully of what we're creating, and not only what we're creating, but like how are they really impacting so-called marginalized communities? And in doing so, how do we really protect people? What is really an algorithmic discrimination protection? How do we make that at MIT? How do we make that at Harvard? How do we make that in our own communities? So, in conclusion, I think from the colonial times to the present, Black women have fought against oppression in the United States. Emergent technologies such as AI are designed to enhance our modern digital lives. These tools are not perfect, but sometimes there's a lot to be done. I believe that ethical training is really necessary for what we're doing, and discernment, emotional intelligence can really make this happen. I am seeking thought partners to help refine my research question, and I'm really open to exploring how to write an ethical AI statement. And this work is really personal to me. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, so we have time if someone wants to start with a question. You can ask a question now. Otherwise, our panel discussion's immediately following anyway, so we can build in the questions there too. So I'm going to start setting up for that.
And you can reach out to me later if you want. I do have to go back to work. I just started my job. So nice to see you. Take care.
Thank you.